Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series episode number 115. My guest in this episode is Cristina Bonnet Acosta, and Cristina is an organic intelligence holistic coach. And they have a 20-year background in Buddhism, psychotherapy, and spiritual development. And I wanted to read from her website, and she has a bachelor's in communications from the University of Puerto Rico, but she has dual masters, one in literature, one in Buddhist studies, and she's getting a third advanced degree in psychotherapy. I only mention that because in gist of the conversation that I had with her, we're looking at a more holistic approach to psychotherapy and to coaching, and she brings her background to bear on this holistic approach. So that's why I'm mentioning the degrees, because I think it's important. But we had a wonderful conversation. I learned from her, and I hope you do as well. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your presence. And I'd like to welcome Cristina Bonnet to the IdeaCast. I almost stumbled on your last name. I apologize. Early morning. Anyway, Cristina, welcome to the IdeaCast. I'm looking forward to a conversation because our pre-meet was really cool, and we talked before we hit record, so I know we're going to have a really neat conversation. So welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's super nice to be here.
Yeah, like I said, I'm looking forward to what we're about to do. To the YouTube audience, I hope you're prepared for what we're about to do. I welcome you all as well. I thank you for your presence. You're that third person in the room, and although it's asymmetrical, you can't directly communicate with us. I will have information for Cristina to access her work, as well as perhaps contact her if you should feel inspired to do so. So Cristina, I think let's go ahead and do that classic thing where we learn about you, and the audience and I can get a little bit of a background on where you're coming from and what you're doing presently.
Oh, thank you so much. So nice to be here. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because I think we will have a super dialogue. So just a very brief intro. I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I'm currently in Vienna, in Austria, so I move back and forth. So that's geography sort of orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently working as a holistic coach. And that, to me, it has evolved what that means. But as of lately, it is how to work with people in a way that integrates, of course, the usual mind, body, soul. That's kind of what holistic has meant. And yes, I do that, but also how to tease apart how to address each of those aspects of our being. So that has been lately what I've been most interested in, because I'm having clients who, actually almost all of them, who come and they are so overloaded with different theories, techniques, methods, ideas. Many of them are using rather differentiated language in psychology, like they're aware of their emotions, nervous system, vagal tone, narcissism, personality disorders, like they have so much info, but then they're just overwhelmed. They're like, should I do? Should I relax? Should I do exercise? Should I do functional medicine and take all these supplements? And on the one hand, of course, it's great that we have access nowadays to so many different sources of support. And on the other hand, in my experience, in my own experience and that of the clients I work with, it's actually where the process usually works in terms of healing is how to simplify, how to come back to this simple sense of being in the present moment, just the basics. Excuse me. So that has become more and more. Sometimes I feel more like I'm a detective, like I'm a detective with people where like they come and I'm like, how are your relationships? How do you, how is your sleeping room? Are you able to like that? Or like, okay, of course, there's belief system, there's emotions, and then it's like, how's your relationship to technology, to the environment? And there's all these different aspects to know, because if one puts a lot of effort into just one aspect, but sort of ignoring the other ones, in my experience, sometimes the crucial interventions can be in the various aspects of our being. Not sure if that's a kind of sensible introduction. I guess I it can be maybe a bit confusing. I'm still trying to figure out like an elevator pitch for what I do, but it's, in a way, it's very simple. In another way, it's taken a lot of time to develop. And I think what I was telling you about, I'd like to maybe start us off with this, that one of the aspects that I've taken on as a map, so there's all these maps of consciousness, and I love maps of consciousness. Somehow for me, they are super fascinating. There's Buddhist maps, there are Christian maps, and I'm using the integral map. And okay, I'm gonna do that. So I studied Buddhism. As you know, I have a master's in Buddhism. I'm being certified as an organic intelligence coach. I have a literature degree, and I'm finishing my psychotherapy degree. So that's just, you know, the influences. So then one of the maps, after studying all sorts of maps, and the one that's making a lot of sense for me, it's the integral theory map of the 4 quadrants. I think I mentioned that, but I think maybe that's a part, like when I say holistic coach, a lot of what it refers to, it's including these 4 quadrants. So not only the mind, body, soul thing, although that's there as a sort of shortcut, but the quadrants, it's sort of 4 aspects of any human experience. And one is the internal aspect. And that's where most of psychology, psychotherapy, self-development has focused, which is our internal emotions, our belief systems, our thoughts, our, how do we feel the emotions? And then there are the narratives, and there is all of this, how do we work with our trauma? But it's sort of like a personal inner work. That's what it's called, the inner work. And then in the quadrants, that's just 1/4 of our human experience. Then there's the other quadrant, which is a bit more connected. Ken Wilber calls it the it, which is more the body, the brain. Nowadays, thankfully, there's much more integration between these two, where we know much more about the nervous system and how do we, the sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic, like we have a much more clear understanding of the mind and body. But that can also mean, of course, exercises. It can mean medication, of course, if that's, you know, sometimes I see people working so hard in their inner, you know, their beliefs, their yoga practice, they are doing therapy, group therapy, and then they go to a doctor, they get some medical support, and it's like, wow, that makes a lot of a huge difference. So that's one. Those are the 2. And then the other 2 is community. One of them, it's like community relationship, and relationships, like sometimes that's also been an experience where there is somebody who's doing meditation, also therapy groups, but they're basically all alone at home trying to work their own minds, and then they just don't have supportive system around them. So that's also something that is taken into account. And then the one that usually is not taken into account in holistic therapy, and it's also there as the 4th quadrant, which is much more the external world. So like technology, government, environment, all of these things that are outside, and we often think like, oh, you can change how you relate to them from the inside. And that's definitely, of course, if one is a Buddha and if one is, you're probably in a super terrible situation and you can stay super calm. But for most of us humans, if we are living in a crazy relationship with technology or in an environment where we never see nature ever or things like this, that's another quadrant where there is a potential for healing. So yeah, that's a lot of info, but that sort of explains what I mean by holistic, addressing these different things and then simplifying the path for each person. Like, what are the areas where we can work together to, okay, the deepest healing, we don't assume that it's going to come from one method or one technique, but we try to map how is your whole human experience and what are the areas in a simple way that can create calm and ease rather than put more pressure, more things to do, more practices. Yeah. Yeah, I hope that's a little complicated, right? I hope it's...
No, I've got a sophisticated audience, so you're fine. They're still here. We might have lost one or two people who clicked on. They didn't know where they were, what they were in for. But
Okay.
no. And so I'll repeat back a couple of thoughts that came to me, some takeaways from what you said is, excuse me, we need an ecology of practices. But as you said, we're in a state of overwhelm, thanks to the immediacy of information and the overwhelm of information. And that's a huge thing. And I would like to open that up more with you. I also think that I am a citizen of the West and I can criticize the West, and that we are results and solution oriented in our delusional thinking. We don't understand necessarily, and they you see them as memes on Facebook or whatever, but the process and the undertaking is far more important than any result or any destination that you may think you have charted out for yourself. It's something I took away from what you were just saying, is that it's more about the process, and it's more about the unending inquiry within the process. And that's where the ecology of practices can come in, because they're diverse. And if they're suited to you as your uniqueness, and your individuality, which again is a problem that you brought up, is we are conditioned to see ourselves as strongly individual and not necessarily relational, as you pointed out, especially with the 4 quadrants, that there's relationality in those quadrants. And I think that's not a huge problem, but it's a problem that may be under the radar, is that we don't deeply connect with the concept or the perspectival knowing of relationality and the relata amongst us that we have to understand our connectedness to. So that's another thing. I'll parrot back to you that you said, and I mean parrot in a good way. I'm repeating what you said and acknowledging it. So yeah, there's so much richness there. And there was something else, I think. We talked before we hit record that there's a huge context dependence on the effectiveness of, say, like a mindfulness practice or something that comes from the East, and we're trying to employ it here in the West, and that we have to have a broader contextual aperture or window to see the work. And I think that's important too. And some people are getting it, because mindfulness has been in the West for a while now, and it's slowly integrating into society. But I think if we just jump right into it cold turkey, as you pointed out in another conversation you had on another podcast, that bad things can happen in the best of intended practices. And I don't mean bad, and it's just the affect is unsettling. Psychosis can arise or things like that. So anyway, those are the takeaways that I took from your introduction. So why don't we start with the modal confusion that we can find ourselves in when we are inundated with so many different approaches and techniques and modes of transformation and support and healing and yada yada yada. When you have a client, when you take someone on, what's your way of helping them to find a healthy ecology of practices, to land with maybe 3 or 4 systems that they can work with that will net those results? How would you help someone suss that one out?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what I was looking forward, why I was looking forward to speaking to you, because when we spoke before, I had the feeling you took what I said and then you were able to name it in this super cool, finding very specific words for what I'm talking about. So I take notes, ecology of practice.
None of that is mine. I watch way too many of these heady philosophical podcasts and YouTube things. So none of it's mine, but and again, I parrot things. And we all are. We're conduits. We pass information along to each other. So I just acknowledge it's not me. So, but anyway, yeah, some of the terms really just land and you're like, oh gosh, yeah. I love ecology of practice.
Yeah, this is a beautiful concept. I'm sure I'm going to start using it because it's sort of nails it down. Well, so there are different ways of going about it. Of course, there is, in the beginning, is really about this, you can say traditional way, but I think it's just a beautiful way of creating a relationship where people can feel safe and where we can start really unfolding what's important, what's meaningful for this person. But that would be maybe the first session or something like this to see, okay, how can we attune to each other? And then normally, like now I'm working with a client. She's lovely and it's great. She's already done a lot of work, but she came, she's taught me a lot because she came exactly with this idea like, I'm so overwhelmed. I don't know, should I do my breathing exercises? Should I do my yoga nidra? Should I go for long walks in nature, meditate? Like she's just like, I would have to spend my whole day doing these things. And so basically, because of she's stable in her life. So, but we just decided nothing. What is going to be the first exercises. So I offer like a 12-week program, which at the end ends with an ecology of practice. That's how it's a roadmap. Okay. It's a kind of roadmap, but in the beginning, the first week, it's going to be learning to do absolutely nothing. So that I took that. There's many different cultures who do it. As you know, there is, to throw some Eastern terms, but there is the Wu Wei, there is Mahamudra, there is different sort of ways of just resting without action. But the one that I'm liking nowadays is actually from the Netherlands. It's a Dutch concept, which is used very like with humor, but it's called niksen. Nix means nothing, and en is the verb, so it's like to do nothing. It's sort of in Italian, it's la dolce far niente, or I tried to find an English term, and I thought, well, maybe chilling out could be one.
Chilling out. Vegging out, chilling out.
Yeah, vegging out, exactly. I recently read something like bed camping or something like this, which I thought was funny, like staying in bed all day, like just doing things. So Nixon is not necessarily in bed. It's actually can be sitting out, but it's literally just learning how to be there without any purpose whatsoever. Like the purpose of Nixon is to be without any purpose. Okay. And sometimes, because when we meditate, when we relax, there is always this little purpose of like, oh, I want to feel better. I'm going to do it so that I can get to feel better. And that's great. But when the nervous system is cranked up already with intensity, the first step is often nothing, no goal, just learning. Sometimes it's kind of funny because I'm like, I don't know if it feels funny that you're paying me to sit here and do absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
We don't do that the whole session, but sometimes it's just, I'll put a song and it'll be like, let's just for 10 minutes, walk around your living room, or just let's learn to do nothing. And it's really amazing what that actually can do.
Yeah.
So that is actually the first step often. If people get very overwhelmed, if they're more, so there's different sort of ways, but another one is to see if people need systems that are more up-regulating or down-regulating. So in this case, this person is very much in sympathetic activity, so it's much more, let's down-regulate. Okay. If somebody comes and they're much more with this heaviness and this exhaustion and this sense of, I have zero energy, so then we might actually work with a little more movement, and let's learn to be with gentle movements, or to rest without guilt, because a lot of these people are exhausted, but they're like, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And so these are sort of very initial things. Is it a person who needs to activate more, or is it a person who needs to down-regulate more? So that's sort of my first, let's figure out what that means. And then slowly we go deeper into things. Is this a person who has current issues? So instead of assuming we have to speak about the trauma, about everything, it's much more like, well, you're in a job that you hate, you're in a relationship that's super bad, or your dog just died. Like, there can be all kinds of things where people immediately pathologize it, and they assume, if I worked on myself more, then I wouldn't grieve my dog so badly, or I need to do this grief process to get over it. And it's more like to figure out, if this is something in the present, how can we support the system in the present? Which doesn't mean there's no past. It just means maybe this is the priority, because if we bring out now the past, it's just gonna overwhelm more. Yeah. So then of course we explore the main topics of the past. So like, it goes very slowly. That's why I say, okay, let's do 12 weeks, because it's not a lot. Some people stay in therapy for 3 years, you know, but this is more like, at least to have enough time to then slowly inquire into certain big topics that might be lingering from the past. And then there's lifestyle things of seeing. I'm a very big on our relationship with technology. That's, I've seen to myself. I have a teenage daughter, and clients, that it's understated what that is doing to our psyche. You know, the amount of information we're putting in our senses, through our senses, and the nervous system capacity to process it. Like, there's really a disconnect. There's a disconnect between what we have evolved to actually process as sensorial information and what we're putting in. Like, there's just some, I'm hoping that soon it will be more, sometimes I think it's gonna be like smoking, where in the beginning everybody's like really cool smoking, and now it's like, you have to be careful.
Not good for you. When I was a little boy, I would be driving down the road with my father, and a squirrel would run out in front of the car and panic, and then freeze, and then get run over, or there'd be, the result of that having happened before, and there's a dead squirrel on the road. I asked my father, well, why aren't the squirrels, and my dad was like, they didn't evolve with cars, they didn't evolve with cars. And so I'm like, at 7 or 8, I was like, oh, okay. But when you said that, it just brought me right back to that story. We're just squirrels in the road with technology.
Right, yeah, that's
these
exactly
Pleistocene
right.
brains.
Exactly.
50 petabytes of information hitting me. I'm used to about 10 million, Anyway, so sorry, I had to have that tangent.
It's totally, but it's true. Like people like us, we didn't grow up with a smartphone. No. For us, this came relatively recent, and the change, it's just, we all know it, right? Like, we used to read books and go on the train with our books. Now, who's reading a book on the train? Like, nobody. You're instead like just scrolling. It's okay, it's not like to make it evil. It's just that we're having to process things in a different way. So I like to figure out these things first, like the 4 quadrants, like what's going on, tease it apart so that then we can really hone into, okay, maybe, of course, I can refer if I see like, okay, the suffering is just too strong. You might really need to deal with it more, either with a more professional person or with a doctor. Like that's fine. Like no shame. Like let's see just what can be the most effective thing. And we can still work together if that feels supportive. Or okay, let's start to work with our belief system. That's usually, I mean, all of us can use a little support in processing our different patternings and things we've taken on from childhood, or even now intergenerationally. Like we can all use some support in that, but I'm very careful to not just do that, but to figure out how to integrate it into a more coherent system. And then I'd like to say also that, of course, I'm a coach, so it does tend to, even if we identify like, okay, more time in nature, just really taking walks, looking, and sort of timing a little bit more your technology usage could be really helpful, because if you're super wired, so we can experiment, but I'm not gonna be there to check that or to take the walks with the person. So that's something more that they do. So there does tend to be a little more emphasis on the first quadrant, which is the inner world. But even that, I have fun quizzes that I do with people, which is like, okay, are people more of a Zen tendency where they really benefit from structure and sitting down and being silent, or are they more mystic and they like more creativity and poetry and being through pleasure, healing through healthy pleasure? I heard, excuse me, one podcast that you did recently with somebody who was saying, I think the singing priestess or something like that.
Yeah,
It was
MD.
beautiful. Yeah. How she spoke about connecting to pleasure. And I think for certain people, I call it the mystic ones, this really can connect very much. And then there's the skepticals who you cannot give them some woo-woo crazy thing. They want to figure things out and to do things that are more analytical in nature, so we can do inquiry and things like that. And then there's the activists who they really want to do a change in the world. You know, they cannot tell them to sit down. So things like this, I have different fun ways where people can, so like to start like this, and if it's one type, then we can find what practices are good for that type. So there's, yeah, that's sort of the process that I go through to narrow down things. And last thing I'll say is that one of the big things, which is what I spoke about in the other podcast, it's safety. It's really, really safety, because a lot of these practices and technologies of mind, if you're gonna be digging out, one thing is to dig out your trauma from your childhood, which is already needs a lot of safety, a lot of support. And then in the Buddhist view, it's like you're digging out your past from like your countless lifetimes. So you don't want to mess that and do it in an unsafe way. So there's also checking what things people can do that is safe for them without bringing overwhelm. And I think that's one of my big things. I just have seen so many destabilized people through other methods and things that I'm like, okay, let's take it super slowly. If we meditate, let's do it for a few minutes first and check. So that, like, let's say I call it sometimes the shadow of shadow work, the shadow of work. Like somehow it does, just because we have shadows, it doesn't mean we need to like dive in and like dig it all up and figure out how we handle it.
Yeah. And when I was researching you, you had mentioned Katie Byron, and I was really familiar with their work, and so I looked up the sort of the wiki article on Katie Byron, and there was a 4-question format that they used. And I thought that was interesting because it got me to thinking about something you touched on earlier and you were just speaking to now, and that is when we do dig into the past, that from what I understand in those 4 questions, she offers a counterfactual inquiry into the past. And I think that's healthy because let's acknowledge that there was a trauma that, you know, when you're 7, something bad happened. But then through the unfolding of your creation of your history, as you move forward, the history gets modified, and there can be a tendency for that history not to truly reflect what the trauma might be. It could go to the effect of, you know, you gloss it over, it's not as bad as it was, and then that might mask it, or you over dramatize it, and what was, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, a 4, and it's a 7 now. And I like that counterfactual because it gets you to sort of let go of the veracity or the epistemic value of the question, of the incident or the trauma. And you can still acknowledge and validate that trauma. But any of these little stories that might be going on one way or the other, that they're not as important as the fact that, let's just say that this existed, X existed, and that we need to just, you know, understand what's the best way for you to either heal it or make peace with it. Yeah, work through it, process it. So I like that. I like that idea because I think in trauma therapy, because there's been, I think, cases historically where there was there was something that happened in Southern California back in the 90s, and psychotherapists were leading children into thinking they were molested by their
I
daycare
know.
center workers, you
Right.
know, and it's like that, we're susceptible to that. And I don't think there was anything deeply malfeasant going on there. It was just these overzealous psychotherapists who wanted to make a name, and it just blew up in a very terrible way. Or uncles will get accused of doing things to nieces, and that happens a lot, but there's instances where it didn't happen, and the therapist led the patient. So anyway, I don't want to be hyperbolic about that because there's a lot of bad things that happen that need to come out. But yeah, just that idea that you can heal more efficiently, perhaps with not so much focusing on the details and more focusing on the forgiveness or the making sense of the trauma. You know, one thing
Yes.
and one last thought is that one thing I would do, and I do this in my own life, is I understand the perpetrator, and I understand that the perpetrator had things done to them. And, you know, I speak to a family, my own personal thing. It's like, I can't judge that person. I can't, I can distance myself. I can do all the things that are necessary for me, but that person had a history of their own that propagated what happened. And so I can make peace. And that way I don't, you know, it's good. So anyway.
Right, right. I'm curious, like, did you find some methods, or I'm sure you have a long journey of inquiry and looking into these things, but as you were talking, yeah, that's one of the things I also asked the people, like, what things have been supportive? Like, did you try a few things and then were able to integrate that sense of forgiveness easily, or were you a self-taught like, if you want to share about it? I'm just curious, like, how you came to that sense of acceptance and understanding of the perpetrators, so to speak.
Yeah. Intellectually, I'm at peace, and emotionally, I don't know if there will be a peace because I no longer associate with that person, and they're going to go to their grave with this being unresolved. And that's, I can handle that, but it's at the same time, it's not a complete healing journey. So what I do to project that out is to take care of myself, but also look to others and say, this is partly a cautionary tale and partly a tale of there's a way through it, and there's a way to take care of it. And we're not all afforded the maybe the blessing of a full and complete healing where there is a catharsis between two persons or something like that. That may not always be so. Sometimes people die before there's resolution. So we have to take what we can get. And so for me, I have gotten from this that I understand that person's pathology. I understand why they became, because their parents were horrific monsters. You know, there's just no way around it. And they themselves had horrific monsters. So it's this almost like genetics, you know, it's memetics, you know, it just passes on. And if you can understand that and try to take that to your heart, so like the head can get it, and then if the heart can get it, you're good. And it doesn't require that reciprocity between the two people to say, we now love each other, we forgive each other, we understand. Let's go walk off into the sunset together. But that doesn't have to happen. You know,
Mhm.
you take it whatever degree of
Mhm.
satisfaction or completion that you can get. So that would be
Yeah.
probably what I'd pass on to other people. But my way of projecting the trauma now, and I don't consider it trauma. I what I went through is nothing compared to, you know, it's all scalable. Is my drama was you know, such that I'm motivated now to do these kind of things where I talk to people and offer things into the commons, into the public sphere, or you know, into humanity that you know, if you're working with something, you can work with it, and you can have healthy healing and understand, you know, so that kind of thing. That's how
Yeah,
I would
awesome.
project it.
Thank you for sharing. Sorry, I know
Oh yeah.
sometimes I
Oh no
shift
no no.
the format. I'm like, oh, I'm very curious about
Yeah.
that.
No. I'm good. I'm hard-headed, so it's okay. Yeah.
This is great. Um, yeah. So sorry, I got a little carried away.
No, that's okay. Let's talk about hmm, we
We
talk
went,
about do
yeah.
you want me to throw you something new, or do you want to continue a thought? Because I
Sorry,
can
what was the initial thing? The initial thing that you had asked me, or
well we
okay, let's keep going. I somehow had the feeling, oh, there was a question in there. I'm sure it's gonna come up.
I was going to say, if it does, just bring it out. You know, it's okay. This doesn't have to flow perfectly contiguously. So,
Yeah.
no, the next thing I was going to say is, we talked about this previously, is there is the self that heals and the self that is self-reliant and the self. But there's also the nexus. There's a community, and I would love to tap into that with you because I think that is so important. We go around as, again, in the West, convinced that we are these little unitary monadic systems, this one agent, and we don't understand the complexity of our integrated nature into our psychosocial, like you and I and everyone else, or the psycho environmental biological systems. You know, so there's so much there. There's so much complexity, but yet we're conditioned, I think, to think that we are standalone, and by golly, you know, we're going to soldier our way through it. So if we could open that up and talk about the need for a communal perspective and the shared, like we just did a minute ago. You were asking me, like, well, what was your drama and my drama, and now how do I project my, and I do that for the community. I you know, if anybody can benefit from that, if nobody does, that's fine too. But if, yeah, so yeah.
Yeah. Yes, right. That's really one of my big things. I don't know if I told you that, but somebody sent me a meme which was really I thought, wow, I've been looking for words for that, but they said something like to tell people to do self-care when what they need is community care is leading them in the wrong direction, something like that. And I'm all about self-care. I think it's such a beautiful thing once one realizes, wow, we've been treating ourselves really like some military boss or something. And I mean, I came through that through my own experience because I live in Austria and I'm from Puerto Rico, and my family and me were very close. And I miss them terribly a lot of the time. I miss them so terribly. And now it's better. My daughter is bigger, so I can travel more regularly. But I remember a time when I've had a meditation practice for many years, and I keep shifting how I approach it, depending on where I'm at and what I learn. But at some point, I realized I was having this discomfort, and I kept trying to approach it through, like, let me go to a support group, let me do some relaxation, some meditation. And then I went to Puerto Rico. And then I thought, hey, this is what I needed, time with my sister, time with my mom, like sitting down with them. And there is no how can I say that? There is no substitution, there's not substitution for each thing. Like if I'm in Puerto Rico and then I think, oh, they're gonna just go in there and chilling with my sister, that's gonna be my solution. Like that's clearly not gonna be a full solution. But if I'm at home trying to shift, like doing inquiry, meditation, relaxation, sometimes it can be helpful, but if that leads us to believe like, oh, I don't need anybody else, I'm here to change my mind, and it negates some of our basic nature as Homo sapiens, right? As a social species, which is that we do thrive on connection, on being with each other. And so that something I've realized a lot, that in this self-help, self-improvement era, and I always emphasize it because that has to be emphasized. I think it's wonderful that now people are so much more aware of it. And if people out there, they haven't done therapy or any self-help thing, like go for it. It's great. It's just, I'm talking more about its limits, not about its usefulness, but that even the wording, it's like self-help. I help myself. I improve myself. And there's a lot that can be done, but it's funny that it really echoes on our individualist, like you said before, like neoliberal society of like, I can achieve it, I can be enlightened, I can do it. And the thing is that the way where that can go really wrong is through dissociation, because we can be there and maybe our wounds are more relational. A lot of the times our developmental things are very often relational, but I just mean at a core level, we have been, let's say, could be we're isolating from others. We're totally terrified of any closeness or intimacy. We just have a terrible social phobia or things like this. And then we decide, well, that's great. Then I can be happy just by sitting alone in my room and reading self-help books. And it actually leads in the other direction, because you're sort of getting more and more, you're getting deeper and deeper into that sort of, I don't need anybody, I'm totally self-sufficient, self-reliant. It negates spirituality too, which, for some people it's not important, but if one is also interested in thinking, okay, it's not all about me and how I do things, but there is some connection to something bigger. In certain practices, not in all, of course, but mostly these practices that are more like, okay, let me do it myself, let me journal, let me concentrate. So then, yes, that can create problems. And that's where I feel it cannot be understated. That meme for me is so great. Like to tell people self-care when what they need is community care. I thought, right. Yeah. Like there's all these single moms. They're like super stressed out. They're like working. They have full-time job, 2 kids, under-earning, single earning. Of course, all of this lack of privileged people, oppression, etc. Like, do some self-care. It's like, can somebody just come and like give me some help so that I can like actually don't feel like I have to carry everything on my shoulders. So yeah, that's kind of something to navigate through those paradigms.
You really flipped the light bulb on for me when you were just saying that, because it seems so obvious now, and maybe I guess it was implicit before, but the idea that the trauma, the thing that is hurting, was systems. It was people. It was relational. It was a group or an individual other that caused you to have that negative valence or that negative affect experience. And then you turn around and say, I, as the individual, must now enter into therapy or repair. And I like that. That just seems so profound to me, that you can say, I was injured by, a group dynamic or the mean girls or the bullies or the man or the system or the company I worked for or the parents I had. But now it's incumbent upon me as the singular entity to sort this all out, right? I mean, it's almost like if I could say, okay, it was this series of persons or an entity of an agency, a company, or whatever it was. But now I have to enter into another equally dynamic system or organization or group of people to move my way out of that into a better valence or a better affective situation. So it seems kind of intuitive when you really kind of lens it that way.
Yeah, it's true. I tell you that meme, I know it's a silly thing, but I thought, whoa, I've known this, but somehow it just, that's what it is. And I mean, the basis of psychotherapy, like I always, it sounds a bit funny, but like everybody should have a support. Like in the past, you know, when we had the wise elders in the community, and now people have a coach or a therapist, or they just have someone in the family who's this wise person they can go to, or a wise friend. And I think we all need somebody, not all, I wouldn't say all, most of us need somebody who can reflect back our goodness, who can reflect our humanity in a positive way. And yet I know that in psychotherapy, the idea, they've done a lot of research on this, on like how and why is psychotherapy effective. This was a very big research, one of the few that they managed to get funding for without the pharma industry being involved. So it was a good study, but they found what really made it more effective or less effective was the good relationship between the client and the therapist. So that relationship, regardless of what system they worked through, it was that relationship. So I think in that field, we've known for a long time that it's relational, but nevertheless, I still feel something is missing, because you cannot heal your whole relationship by paying someone to have a good relationship with. That can be so supportive and so great. And I think, like I said, everybody, it's really great beginning, but I think it's also up from that relationship to be able to lead into other healthy community environments where that will, because to see somebody 1 hour a week, it's good to have some initial sense of like, okay, somebody who can reflect my goodness and lead me. But still, if that person is just going to give them a bunch of methods and be like, okay, then go home and do this journal, do that, instead of saying like, okay, how can we plant you? How can we bring you to an environment where this can happen more recurrently, where this can be really a source of support? And a lot of this, what I've learned, I'm just noticing a lot of it has been self-experimentation, but a lot of it, I do want to say, it's been thanks to Steve Hoskinson, who I'm training with as an organic intelligence coach. And he's brought, now that I speak about it, I'm noticing, wow, I've been really influenced by him. He has a course that's called The End of Trauma. And it is also this idea that when we focused on trauma, at times we are eliciting the states of that trauma. So like when we speak about it, when we go through it, a lot of time we're eliciting in our physiology those states. So like, how do we work in a way that we can teach our system safety, we can teach our system joy, pleasure, without necessarily going back and kind of digging up the past, which has place. But one of the things he says, which I liked a lot, was that one of the most powerful things that we can do for ourselves is find ourselves in a healthy environment, in a healthy social environment. Because there is, I think that's something that many philosophies and traditions have, that there is this innate impulse for us humans to self-actualize, to heal. Like we all want to be happy, basically. That more or less, even the darkest, normally they want to be happy, even if it's through thinking, okay, I'm just gonna be in this dark cloud and not try anything else. But so we share that, and in psychology, this was Carl Rogers who started to speak like our innate impulse for self-actualization. So we do have all of this impulse of sort of experiencing that goodness in us. I'm one of the proponents that there is like this human goodness. And when we're in environments that can reflect that, you know, good friendships, good groups, classes where that's there, this can do so much, sometimes so much more than sitting down 1 hour in the morning to meditate.
Yeah.
Sometimes, I'm not saying one has to balance it, because if
Yeah.
you're only depending on people, it's also not going to work. It's more like not negating the power that a healthy environment can have. In mirroring our goodness, especially if we grew up like, gosh, how many of us in the West grew up really in a super supportive environment?
Yeah.
Maybe in the East too, I don't know. I'm just not, I don't know. But like most of us do need to do some damage repair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a saying, adversity breeds character, and not everybody is going to accept that, because it can also destroy you, and it can turn you into a monster, or it can turn you into a victim. And so I say that with a huge grain of salt, but I think, if you want to frame it that way, that the crap that you're going through is an opportunity. Some say it's a master showing, it could be a master showing up to teach you something, but if you can lens it that way, which brings me to an idea that we can get locked into a kind of victim identity. And and that facilitates certain types of satisfaction. It's like, well, I'm a victim, so therefore it's, I nothing, I have less accountability for, for some of the things I say and do. Well, I was trying, and I don't want to get on a soapbox about that, but I mean, it's something we have to be careful about. And you mentioned self-actualization, and it got me to thinking of that old aphorism about enlightenment, which says, before enlightenment, you chop wood and fetch water, and after enlightenment, you chop wood and fetch water. And I think again, in the West, where we're this kind of results-oriented culture, that to me, and I don't ever want to be enlightened myself. I like being dirty and messy, but if you do aspire to that it's not a result. It's just it's a step in the path, that it's just this continuum of growth. And when and again, if anybody says they're enlightened,
it's strange, right?
Yeah, take that another grain of salt there. But I mean, to me, again, enlightenment is a very gossamer, very abstract thing, and that so in other words, I'm more enlightened than I was at 5 years of age, and I'm good with that. That I don't do the same dumb. Most of the time, I don't do the same dumb things I did at 5 or 15 or 25. Now that I'm in my mid-50s, I'd like to think that I can comport myself in the manner of somebody who's made mistakes and learned. That's beautiful. Right. That's my level of enlightenment. But to get off my tangent, right? To be actualized and to be that better human, that better person, is not a result. Again, it's more, as I said earlier, it's like process. It's just, and if the sense of enlightenment arises, just say, okay, hi, and then, chop wood and fetch water.
Oh, that's lovely. I love that. Yes, that's great.
But it seems like in the West, it's like you get the gold star, and then you can, you know what I mean? It's just like victim identity. It's like you have this enlightened identity, and now it's like, because I don't want to judge, but I've met people who are like, oh, I've gone through my 7th order of crystalline activated DNA or whatever, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. I don't really push back on it, but I'm just like, okay. But it's like, whatever you just told me is cool, and I hope it serves you well. But don't trip over it.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm being kind of polemic here, and I shouldn't, because, like I said, I like being flawed. I don't ever want to be enlightened.
I love that. That's really.
Anyway, sorry, it's another.
To think about. No. I'm just taking it in because it's so many things there that you touched on. I mean, exactly, like the seventh crystalline. What did you say?
Oh, you hear some of the new age talk and it's like, oh, my 13 strand, I crystallized my DNA and now I'm at this 13 strand and my eighth chakra is now, resonating at 750 hertz or whatever. And it's like, I get all of that as metaphor. Like if we could all use that language but they reify it into this kind of thing where it's so real and again, if it's a tool or a heuristic to help them grow, but sometimes it's more like they're wearing it as a tiara and a robe and a scepter or whatever, like they've achieved something. And so again, I'm going back to that achievement versus look, enjoy the road and the journey, the process, rather than, being at that altar or that throne or whatever, the ascension that you think again, I don't mean that in a polemical, judgmental way. It's just, we can do that to ourselves. We all can think very highly of our achievements and that can hurt. It's like the Buddha said, that attachment is suffering. I think he was referencing, as far as I understand, that's attachment to the pursuit of ethical materialism or ideas of a bodily satisfaction or hedonic scale or physical material goods and so forth. And to me, also, the journey to enlightenment or spiritual enrichment can be fraught with suffering because you're attaching to these ideas that I did activate my 13-strand crystalline DNA and now I'm perfect. I'm enlightened and I'm walking amongst the shadowy, unenlightened, messy people, and that in itself can set you up for a world of hurt because then you're self-deceived into thinking you're an elevated whatever you are, and you're amongst all of us that are still dirty and messy. And that can hurt. That can hurt.
I think you hit the spot. It's that it can hurt. That's, I think, at the end of the story, I have a friend, or actually someone. Yeah, I would say it's a friend, somebody I know, and sometimes she records this talk, but like she was saying, my ethics, I used to have a lot of ethical ideas. Now my ethics are, how is it working for you? How is it working for you? Because I think it's exactly, like, of course, the victim mentality, this is very complex, and I think it requires so much care how one speaks about it, but at the same time, it's like, how is it working for you? Like, if you get some self-forgiveness and like, if you're full of guilt and it gives you a sense like, hey, wow, I was really mistreated. Like, there can be a moment of self-realization of like, whoa, this was not my fault. Like, I was actually a victim. But then this identification with that story again and again, like I survived this, I did that, like it's fine if it helps, but for a lot of people it actually creates this sense of powerlessness, of like, I'm always caught up in that person who was abused, and there is then a disconnect from one's agency or from one's inner glow, or I don't know why that word came to my mind, but that inner person, authentic person, who is also separate of the person who was back then abused. So there's all this, or the chakra idea. I know exactly what you mean in the New Age movement. Like, people are walking around with so many, and again, I think there are people for whom those things open the heart and they can exactly, but there are others that you're just like, that's strange, because they walk around very disconnected from people and just sort of, and it's like, I don't know if that's really what I want. I'd rather, like you say, I don't know, have my flaws and be more connected through others, through them.
And if Christ could dine with the commoners and the prostitutes, the rest of us can break bread with, ordinary people, And I wouldn't say any of that if I didn't dwell in victim consciousness myself, and if I didn't, and I love the idea of chakras as a myth, like a mythos, and I mean that in the best way. That it's a proto psychology. It's like, well, what's going on in your mind? What are you aspiring to in transcendence? What is your truth? What is your heart? What is your gut feeling? There's a proto psychology that is so amazing, but don't try to make it real, like, that you can get somebody can sell you a magnet and you can suddenly erase, decades of trauma and be this, that's where we can fall into the con man's grip. So it's a caveat to the audience if they're
Yes,
listening.
yes.
Yeah.
I totally, that would be another podcast, right? Like New Age spirituality and its pitfalls. And that's, yes, it's there is a lot of that. And it sometimes can reinforce that identity of this is a good one, a thing that I wanted to say. It can keep alive that identity of somebody for whom there's something really wrong. There's something really wrong with me and I have to heal it. That's another thing that gets together in this culture of self-help and self-improvement. It's like there's something broken in me and I need to heal it. I need to go through so many, now it's ayahuasca and psychedelics and this, oh gosh, there's so many things, as you know, like emotional activation, all of this. And the thing is that I feel like psychedelics, like that's super interesting. I keep reading about it and I'm thinking like, wow, supported therapy. Like it's not, I'm not against any of them. It's more like what I observe is like when people get the identity that their mission in life is to heal and they keep going from one modality to another.
Right.
And it's like, now I connected to my ancestors and it's like, great, okay, can you leave now with that and move into enjoying life? Or do you need, but now I need more. It's really perpetuating that sense. And what I like about organic intelligence and why it's put a lot of things together for me is this idea that we really heal through support. We heal through the here and now, through simple pleasures. It can be, the sun in the face. It can be drinking a cup of tea. And the reason why we heal sometimes through these simple pleasures, of course, with support, and it's because if our nervous system is constantly on alert, thinking it's not safe, and you give it these little moments of, hey, all is good, this can have, at times, I'm not saying this is not a purist, like this is the way to liberation. It's just that at times we find that this can have a much more supportive effect than having, all kinds of things scheduled in one's calendar of like, okay, here I'm gonna do regression, here I'm gonna do healing the womb, here I'm gonna do ayahuasca. Like it's bringing up all the stuff and perpetuating that idea that, oh, I'm broken, I have to heal, I have to heal. So that that's another risk.
And I've heard people say, who have some academic credibility, that ritual leads to transcendence, and I think we can almost become addicted to the seeking of rituals and seeking the transcendent experience that may arise from that. And just like enlightenment, I think transcendence should be much more mundane than we build it up to be. Transcendence is just moving you into a new frame, a new perspective, and that you, as you said, okay, now that you did this, can you go into life? Can you go into the mundane, the experience of just having to human and having to relate? And I think, again, that we can get ourselves, much like with booze or drugs or anything, we can get addicted into that. Oh, this felt good. And I went to this because I've done it. I've gone to very expensive meditation workshops, and you spend a week as a kid, like it's Disney and you're having fun, and you come back and you do the dopamine crash. And, it's like, I see the addiction in that, and it's fun. And so anyway, but yeah, just the idea that you can get caught on that hamster wheel of self-help or self-improvement, because it is a positive feedback in the moment. But then, like you said, you have to then be prepared to go back out into the world and do your thing. But I think the secret sauce might be that you can carry away some of the good that came from that workshop, the good that came from, because what I found really the best thing about any of those workshops was the people, and being in with people who were at their best because they were trying to do well. And that connection that was made was priceless. Forget the, whatever was going on in the sage on the stage or whatever. It's just that you were connecting with people. and I bring that into the world, and now I want to be a genuine, a decent person or a nice person, not have shadowy things come out when I deal with people. You know what I mean? So that's to me is the subtle takeaway,
Yes.
the thing that you can bring back to the street and and not have to go chase it again. It's just learn to be satisfied with that. So if you're used to like the roller coaster, bong hits or whatever it is, forget about that for a while. Forget the hedonic, forget that thing and get into the satisfaction that can be derived from the trivial and the mundane.
Right.
There's something, and I think that's a lot of what, there's a good, one of the guys I follow, my philosopher guys I follow, they talk about addiction in a sense that it's called reciprocal narrowing. And that it's this circularity of closure in your ability to focus on what's going on in your life. So and I've done drugs, and so like if I'm using cocaine or whatever, and it's like my relationship with cocaine tends to zero out everything else, and it's me and that cocaine or whatever. And I wasn't a big cocaine user, but I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah.
That everything, that the aperture just narrows down, and it's me and cocaine. I had a wife, I had kids, I had a house, but it's me and cocaine. And same thing with alcohol. It's just I have to have that next drink. I have to have that. It's almost similar in a way when you're, like I was saying, with attachment and suffering. It's like the good can bring into that reciprocal narrowing. So you're missing all the other stuff in life that may seem messy, but anyway, yeah. So that's if any worth.
Brilliant.
And I can, if somebody's watching this and they're like, what the hell is he talking about? I can get you links to the people who talk about that kind of stuff, because it's
that's good. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. One of the things. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
No. You go. Finish that thought. But what I'd like to do though is check in with you about what you're doing in the future. But let's finish where you're going.
Yeah, I'll just say it brought. It's brilliant. I got a lot. I'm looking forward to the recording so I can take some. It's really enlarged my ways of looking at some of these things. I'm always, because I do have a feeling it's a new paradigm that it's not completely new. It's people are thinking about these things, but that we still don't have really a full language to speak about it. So I get a lot of good feedback. And I was just gonna mention again something about organic intelligence, because you mentioned the positive reinforcement, and I just remember that one of the things that Steve speaks about, Steve Hoskinson, is that what actually happens is negative reinforcement in these things of high intensity practices, because in the sense, a lot of them, it's like in order to feel good, you have to feel worse first. You have to feel bad first. And in a lot of these modalities, it's the idea that first you have to feel all your pain. First, you have to have this cathartic moment and look at it. And then, I feel better. But then you come into that loop of, okay, first I have to go through that painful thing. So it's actually a negative reinforcement at times.
Okay. Yeah.
Then I feel better, but it's like, now I have to do it again because I have more pain and I have to.
Again, that kind of speaks to that idea of reciprocal narrowing, where it's this recursive process that you're subtly, you're not, or you're not terribly, it's not super apparent to you that's what's happening. So yeah, that's a good analogy, or good way of looking at it. So yeah, it's, I guess we could summarize by saying that self-improvement and self-help is something that has to be done as a community. And I think that you have to have multiple perspectives to afford you the space and the time and the desire, I guess, to effectively make the changes that you think you want. And those changes, the narrative might change in the change, and that you have to be fluid in that and have people who can support that fluidity. In other words, you don't get that one guru that has 10 commandments, and you activate your quantum this, and you breathe that, and you drink this, and you do whatever. But I think if you can afford yourself that space and find the right community to support that space, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, and that you're, as you said, you're holistic, and it's a comprehensive system that declutters, as you said. It helps to unpack the mess that we've gotten ourselves into when we enter in to the maelstrom, this huge soup of ideas, and there's no fault to that. It's just what we've gotten ourselves with technology and the immediacy of
Yes.
information. So what I would like to ask, though, because believe it or not, we're an hour and 10 minutes, and I maybe want to grant us another 10 to 12, 15 minutes of having you vision your future in the sense of what would you aspire to? What would you, I mean, do you want to write a book? Do you want to come up with a sort of creel of practices or a synthesis of practices that would integrate everything you've talked about? What would you like to see happen for you in the next few years?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share that. These days, I'm really in this time of putting things together, and it's super exciting nowadays when I work with people. I have in June, hopefully, if all goes well, which I think it will, I'll have this organic intelligence certification, and I'm learning so much about it. I'm already working in that, but yesterday I was in one of the coaching calls, and we were talking about different ways to work. And the conclusion was that still this one-on-one work, for most people, that's what can create the most effective results for now. And then that from that one-on-one work, then one can exactly like direct people to helpful communities and things like that. So I've been playing a lot in my mind whether I want to create groups for it, where we can have those communities. But for now, I'm really focused on working one-on-one with people. And I love that work. It feels to me like, what do you do? I just love the people who come to me. I really enjoy that being there with people. And I have developed this 12-week program, which I call Unfold. And I call it Unfold because it's this idea that you don't have to put a lot of effort into it. You just have to let it unfold with a little support, let it be and let it sort of find its own way to unfold. So I'm very much involved now, guiding the first batch of people doing that. And it's really nice because I really sat down and I was like, okay, I've studied years of Buddhism. I've studied a lot of psychotherapy. Now, how do I put together a program where I really feel I'm offering the elements that I think can be taken out? So it's curated, of course, of those from those practices. But it's a nice program also because it includes the one-on-one sessions, but also I send little meditations for each week. So I will send like a voice message with the meditation so that people have some continuity. I'm putting that together and enjoying that very much. And then I'm also writing. So I'm trying and, speaking to people like you who can expand my way of thinking about things. I'm writing articles. That's been, going into the coaching world, it's a crazy world. It's a crazy world in the sense of it's taken a lot for me to find my way of approaching it. And I'm pretty glad that I feel now like, okay, I have found what feels authentic for me. But there is a crazy world of like, do an Instagram channel and grow your audience, do this, do that. And again, it's the same thing. You could do 10,000 things, but I've decided, okay, I'm a synthesizer.
Yes.
Like I synthesize ideas. So I'm putting all these ideas together and I'm writing articles and speaking. Like these are the things I'm enjoying. So I'm focusing on that. And yeah, so more or less I'm dedicated right now to my clients to develop my private practice more. Yeah, that's it. I mean, people can check out my website, which we can put on the show notes, and there I'll have links to the stuff. I'm now offering for the next 6 weeks. Also, I'll let people know 30 minutes free sessions. And there's always free sessions for consultation, like to see if we're a good fit. But now I'm offering this 30-minute session, which are more to give like very, of course, not the whole thing, but a very quick, like what I said before, like, are you a Zen or a mystic or a skeptical? Like, let's figure out, and let's figure out some work, some body of work, some ecology of practice.
Yeah.
Like, what would be a system that one could go in that direction? So I'm excited to yeah, hopefully hear from some of you, and thank you for this chance. And I think, yes, you've made me also now come to the conclusion that what I'm doing now is synthesizing a lot of the things I've studied, you know, like I've been many years studying, and now it feels like the time when, after working one-on-one with people, but with, you know, more on an hourly basis, like now I've created this program where I can bring in all of these things. And it's a time where I'm writing some of these ideas. I'm speaking with people like you, and it feels like a time where, you know, as usual, early 40s, like when one starts to, okay, I've done all of these things now. How do I bring it all together? And that's what I'm dedicated to doing these days.
Well, I think you're off to a great start, and you've got the academic chops, you know, behind you to support this. And like you said, you're a synthesizer. You're an integrating person, and in doing the kind of work that you do, I think that's crucial, because I am visioning for the future what would good transformative work look like, what would good healing practices look like, and I think, again, it is that Creole, it is that weaving of a tapestry of ideas, and permitting ourselves to be fluid and flexible enough to not silo ourselves into any one modality or one particular practice or whatever. So that you're doing that, I think you're setting yourself up for being a good change making facilitator and midwife to others, you know, to in that sense that they're birthing out their new identity or their new expression of themselves. So yeah, I would definitely say that that's what we need and what the future would welcome, I think. So here's to you for that. And I do appreciate your time here and speaking with me, because you've opened me up to some thoughts and ideas as well. And that's what good dialogue is. It's opening a separate space and a separate agency between us, right? A third agency that can emerge from that helps with anybody paying attention to the conversation. So I just want to acknowledge that, and thank you, Christina, for coming on.
It's lovely.
Absolutely.
Really lovely.
Yeah, I agree. To the YouTube audience, thank you all so much. I appreciate your presence here. Again, all information for Christina will be down in the description field. So Christina, I'll say goodbye to you after we stop record, but again, to the YouTube audience, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.